Hello and welcome to BlenderTutor.com. My name is Tom Latvies, and in this quick tip, we're going to go over how to render out a shadow pass out of cycles so that you can integrate 3D renders into a 2D image or a video. So let's get started. This is going to be the end result of the tutorial, so let's take a look at the scene real quick. It's very simple. We're basically just going to have some text, a ground plane, and a lamp. So let's get started. Let's create a new file. We're gonna get rid of our cube. Go into the front view. Let me turn on my screencast keys. All right. So what we're gonna do first is we're gonna have to change the size of the camera so that it's the size of the photo we're going to be using. So for this one, I took a picture with my iPhone. So the dimensions are going to be 3264 by 2448. I'm going to raise that to 100%. And then the next thing we're going to do is turn on a background images, add image. I'm going to change that to camera. And we're going to go open our photo. I'll be providing this photo on the website. So now let's bring the camera to the front view. So if you hit Control-Alt-0 on your number pad, it's going to bring your camera. And now once we're in camera view, we can actually see the photo we're working with. So I'm going to bring the opacity down a little because I want to be able to see our grid. And what we're going to be doing is with the camera selected, I'm going to move it up, and we're going to be using the grid to line up the street basically with the grid so that it looks about right. So I'm going to put it around there. I'm going to rotate the camera on the x-axis a little upwards. All right, and then I'm just going to put that around there, and that's about right. Cool. And now once I'm happy with where that is, I'm going to just bring the opacity all the way up because I want to be able to see the image. So the next thing we're going to do is bring in our ground plane. So just scale that up. You're going to want to make sure it's fully covering the foreground, and even back here, we're going to scale it up because we want it to fully envelop the entire area. Anywhere where there's going to be shadow, we want there to be a ground plane. All right, so what we're gonna do is I'm just gonna give that a simple material real quick. And now let's bring in our text. So I'll just bring in that, go to top view. You can type whatever you want. I'm just gonna type Blender Tutor. All right. Rotate that along the x-axis by 90 degrees. And just bring that over here. And I'm going to actually change the font really quick to something that looks a little better. I would recommend you do the same. And then I'll just scale it up a little. And the last thing I'm going to do to the text is in the extrude setting, I'm going to do like a 0.2 to give it some depth. And now let's, if you go into wireframe view, you could see the street. You want to make sure that it's still on the street. So I'm going to scale it up a little more. And I just don't want to like go off into this grass or something where the ground is uneven. And then I'm just going to rotate this a little bit so it looks a little more interesting. And I'll just give it a quick material. So I'm going to give it like a dark orange material. All right, and the last thing we're going to do in the scene is we're going to change this lamp to a sun. Use nodes. I'm going to change this to about a 0.05, and I'm going to change the strength to 3, and I'm going to make this kind of a yellow sun. And I'm going to save this real quick. As you can see, this is actually the second time I'm recording this for some reason the first time the audio cut out after about a minute, so I just recorded the entire thing and you couldn't hear me. Always fun. Cool. So I have that saved, and let's just really quick look at it. Because the next thing we're going to want to do before we start rendering anything seriously is we want to make sure the shadows, or we want to point the sun in the correct direction so that it matches with the shadows. So it kind of looks like the shadows are, the sun's definitely from the side over here, and I'm gonna rotate it around there. Maybe a little bit more like that. And it looks like maybe like that. I don't want to stretch it too far, and then a little bit forward as well. Now let me just look at that. Cool. I'm pretty happy with that shadow. So the next thing we're going to do is go into the world setting. Click on use nodes. I'm going to apply an environment texture. I can't actually provide these, but I would just say, just Google HDRI or free HDRI, and you'll find plenty of free environment textures. And now, if you look at that, basically the reason I'm doing that is it creates like a 3D map around the entire scene of the sky, so that it's going to light it a little more evenly and give it a little blue color to it, just so it matches the sky a little. Although it's a little strong, so I'm going to turn it down to a 0.6. And the other thing I'm going to do is, because the text is a little dark, I'm going to turn on ambient occlusion and do like a 0.2. And that's going to actually brighten up the text a little bit so you can see it a little nicer. Cool. So with that done, let's start organizing our scene. So we're going to go into the render layers tab. I'm going to call this top one just text. And I'm going to create a second one and call it shadow. All right. And so basically everything right now is on the first layer in the scene. So we're going to want to actually move this ground plane to the second layer. And how you can do that is just select it, hit M, and then 2. And now if you look, that is alone on its own layer. So if I hold down shift, I could select both layers at the same time. And what I'm going to do now is in the shadow layer, I'm going to click that on 2. And then under passes, I'm going to turn on shadow. And on the text layer, I'm going to turn on only layer 1. And if you look at this, the text is kind of passing through the ground a little, which is a good thing in this case, because we don't want it to look like it's floating in the air, or at least I don't. So I'm letting it pass through a little bit so it looks like it's flat against the ground. And what you're going to want to do is use the mask layer on the text layer. You're going to want to turn on the mask layer for layer 2 where the ground plane is, so that it cuts off the bottom that you would be seeing down here. Because basically if we didn't mask that out, once we started compositing, you would see the entire chunk of the text, even the stuff that's underneath that ground plane, but it's going to be lit completely differently underneath than it is above, and it's going to just look strange. So just make sure to turn on that mask layer. Cool. So now that we are pretty much organized, I'm going to save that one more time. And we're just going to set up the render settings real quick. So let's go under this film right here. The film tab, you're going to want to turn on transparent. And then under OpenGL render, turn that to transparent as well. And then under light paths, I'm going to turn on no caustics, turn that to about 5, 0. And under sampling, you're going to want about 100 for at least 100 for the final render. That's what I used, and it seemed to work well enough. Okay. So let's render it real quick. I'll be right back, and then we'll get into compositing. And one last thing, I would recommend depending on what you're rendering with, changing your performance. For me, I'm going to be using my GPU, so I'm going to change this to 256 by 256. And if you're using a CPU, I would recommend 16 by 16. So one more time, I'm going to render this and we'll be right back. All right, and we're back. So if everything went correctly, you should just have some nice floating text. So we're going to go into the compositing setup now. Click on Use Nodes and Backdrop. Now I'm just going to space these apart a little. We're going to duplicate this render layer node. And I'm going to change it to the shadow layer. And we're going to add one more input node. We're going to take an image node. And we're just going to use the photo we were using for our camera setup. So now what we're going to want to do is, let's real quick bring in a viewer node. And as you can see, for some reason my version of Blender I'm using is kind of buggy. It doesn't actually show up as a backdrop right away. I'm going to start adding a few nodes and then it'll pop up in a second. So we're going to add the first one we're going to need, which is actually going to be, let's take the shadow output and bring it in here to look at what we have. And as you can see, it's hard to see right now, but let me bring in the next node, which is going to be we're going to need a box mask. And there we go, now it shows up. So if you look, basically, what I have is this white is basically the ground plane, and this black right here is our shadow. The black everywhere else is just where we didn't have any ground plane at all. And we're going to want to mask that out because we only want this little black shadow area. So we're going to use the box mask for that. So once you attach that, you see it adds a little white box. That's basically our mask right there in the middle of that big black rectangle is a little white rectangle. That's our mask that we're going to be adjusting. So if you look, if I adjust that, it changes the size of the rectangle. So just change that to about a 1.1 and it'll bring it all the way up vertically. For this, we can do about a 0.55. And as you can see, it covers up our shadow. So what we're going to have to do is actually move it up until it's no longer covering our shadow. Cool. So you just want to make sure you adjust it so that it's fully covering everything but the shadow. So now that I'm happy with that, I'm going to bring in a set alpha, which will be under, I believe, converter set alpha. Put that into the image node. And it won't change it yet, but what we're going to do now is bring in a mix node. And that'll be down here. We're going to bring our image and put it in the top node. And we're going to change this to multiply. And now you can see I have a very dark shadow. I'm actually going to want to turn on this button right next to the multiply. And it won't do anything right away, but now if I adjust this number in the alpha setting right here, let's say to a 0.9, now that adjusts the strength of the shadow. So now basically what I want to do is try to match it as close as I can to that shadow in the background. So I'm going to say about a 0.85, maybe a 0.88, and that looks about right to me. So the last thing we're going to do is just add our text on top of that. So let's duplicate this mix node, change it to mix. We're going to put this in the top and then that one in the bottom. And now if you see, that adds our text right on top of it. So we now have a nice 3D text over our background with a nice shadow layer. So it's really as simple as that. You could add that to either still that you take or a video you take, but you're going to want to make sure obviously if you're doing video, you're going to have to 3D track the scene, which I'm not going to cover in this tutorial, but if you'd like me to, I think I'd like to do that. Let me know on YouTube in the comments if you'd like me to do a video tracking tutorial. I'd like to do something like that in the future. And then one last thing that I kind of forgot to mention this time around. When you're setting up your camera, I used the iPhone, which I looked at the specs online. It's about equivalent to a 35 millimeter focal length lens. You're going to want to make sure whatever camera you're using that you know what the focal length of the lens is, because if you look at this, when I change that, it changes kind of the perspective of the camera. So obviously if I were using a different lens, it wouldn't look correct at 35, but for the iPhone, that is good. And that's about it. So hope that wasn't too long for a quick tip, and hope you learned something. Subscribe on YouTube to keep up to date on all my tutorials, and check out the website, blendertutor.com. And I'll talk to you next time. Thanks for watching. Bye.